I'm Joe Feeks, editor of Poultry Health Today, and with me is Dr. Greg Mathis of Southern Poultry Research, Athens, Georgia. Thanks so much for joining us, Greg.
It's a pleasure to be here.
Now, Greg, I remember sitting in on a presentation you gave last year, and you quoted, of all people, Sherlock Holmes. You said that once you eliminate the impossible, whatever remains, no matter how improbable, is the truth. How does this tie in with coccidiosis?
Well, when I gave that presentation, the gist of why I said the impossible is because of part of our coccidia problem is Amiria maxima. And Amiria maxima is the most immunogenic of the species. And unfortunately, it's also the one that we have the most problems at. And that we would think that being most immunogenic, it would send our vaccines, drugs control it, but it still is a big problem. So it seems like it's impossible. So the truths are this: can we figure out how and why that is actually occurring? And I think we're, each and every day, we're understanding more why Amiria maxima behaves like it does. So there are truths, but it's almost impossible to believe that it's not being controlled already.
And it really is like detective work. I mean, it seems like you're trying to unravel a mystery. You've been after coccidiosis for quite some time, but there's still a lot that we don't know.
Yes, there is. And we've started 20 or 30 years ago at the University of Georgia, and looking at anticoccidial sensitivity testing and the disease problems that we had. And we still have some of the same issues today that we had back then. And it is a continuous looking and investigating and trying to figure out what is going on. And I think we're better today than we were, but we still got a long ways to go.
One thing you had also mentioned was that when coccidiosis hits can be just as important, if not more important, than the extent of the infection.
And the timing is important. And I think that a lot of people have done studies where they've shown that later in a grow out, that obviously this is when the meat production is occurring, and that that is the most damaging time. If you look at lesions, just minor cocci lesions toward the end of a grow out can significantly affect production. While if it's earlier on, then they have time to recover. Myriasis cerevisiana, for example, is one of the species upper intestinal, tremendously loss in production performance early on. But if you can get it immunity developed, those cells or the villi will reproduce and actually be better at absorbing nutrients than they were as an earlier age, and you can see a compensatory gain. So there's twofold. There's a compensatory gain issue, as well as if it's late, then you're having a damage issue, and they can't have time to recover. So yeah, the timing is very important, and the particular program you're using is very important as where the timing occurs.
Now, we're seeing a growing consumer demand for poultry raised without antibiotics. And technically, one of the anticoccidials that's used for coccidiosis is an ionophore. It's a type of antibiotic. So those producers who want to raise poultry without antibiotics, they can't use ionophores. How are they going about managing coccidiosis?
Actually, there's a good thing here, and this may not have been come across before, is that there is some resistance to all the ionophores for overuse over time. And yes, they are being classified and they are antibiotics, so they are being removed from antibiotic-free production. But will this, in the short term, can we get them reclassified in the next couple of years? This will give those ionophores time for resistance to rest, to recover, and that I think in the long run, this may be one of the better things, that we're gonna have a whole class of compound that's gonna be reintroduced hopefully, once they figure out that, this has no relationship to human health, that we can call it an anticoccidial instead of an antibiotic. But in the same time, we're eliminating a whole class of anticoccidials when we only have maybe a dozen to start with. Now we're down to the chemical synthetics that are, obviously we know that drug resistance is more of an issue with those, limited use. that turns us into, if we want a purely antibiotic-free, drug-free program, the only thing we can use is a vaccine, the coccidial vaccine. And it's a live organism, causes some intestinal disruption and lead to bacterial problems. And that is where these replacements or alternatives to antibiotics come into really play. And we're looking at prebiotics, probiotics, essential oils, acidifiers, and a number of different combinations of products, and I think that is the way we're going. Will it ever be as good as an antibiotic? Will it be as good as the control we've had in the past with the Ionophores? At this current time, I don't believe that's true, but I think in time that we'll learn how the combination of these other alternatives kind of can interact, and we're going to come out better.
Good point. Now, we've talked about antibiotic-free production. It's growing quickly, but it's still a very small segment of the market. Most poultry producers are still using antibiotics. They use them judiciously. What can they do right now to maximize the performance of their coccidiosis management program?
Well, continuously. We only have a certain number of anticoccidial drugs, including the Ionophores. And traditionally, and I think that will continue, is that the biggest thing that we can do is rotating and not continuously using the same over and over and over again, particularly as a class of compound. And we can first think about the Ionophores in that there are divalent and monovalent, and et cetera, and that it's not a good thing to keep, all monovalents such as salinomycin and Coban and et cetera, or Naracin and Coban, Manicin, back to back, because you're not really switching to a different type of class of compound. While if you went from a divalent to a monovalent, then that will help. But also rotating from using those drugs that we have is still a very important role that we have. And resting them, again, as I talked just a minute ago about, is resting them gives us a little bit of a better improvement in resistance. And I think we'll find that, such as with the Ionophores, again, that resistance that's developed is a very energy costing thing for the parasite, and that will revert back very quickly. So I think right now rotation is still a key factor. Use every one that you can have that are available.
One final question on the rotation, though. Is this something that you can kind of make up as you go along, or just look at it a few months out, or does it really require long-term planning?
Well, considering we only have a certain number of anticoccidial drugs available, then yes, yearly planning is very, very important, because you've got to make sure that you're looking ahead to the next year. As far as, again, can't use the drugs too long because it'll cause resistance. So you need to time that one, as well as the Ionophores. Since we're still using them, that we need to make sure that we're not overusing one class versus another. So yes, it takes some yearly planning, because we are on limited in options that we have, and it gets smaller and smaller. So it's even more important that we know what we're looking at.
Greg, you mentioned vaccination earlier. I'd like to follow up on that. What considerations need to be made when using a vaccine, and do you have to stop using the antimicrobials altogether, or can they be used in the same program? Could you speak to that a little bit?
Well, today, again, as I mentioned earlier, is that the only way we can truly have an antibiotic drug-free program is vaccination. And we do have several vaccines in the U.S. that are available. But again, there is some disruption of the intestine and possibly an interaction of bacteria. We can no longer just think about coccidia without thinking about bacterial enteritis. And anytime I talk about coccidia, I now have to talk about both. And what we have to do is control vaccines. Their most potent time, or the time that they're causing most of the disruptions, around 2 or 3 weeks into the production. And can we modulate that time period? And that is really in the present is what we're a lot of people are focusing on. And if you think about antibiotic-free programs, we can use our drugs. We can put it in during that grower phase. It'll regulate, modulate the coccidia to a degree, and then we have immunity. We have some reduction in the interference in the bacterial proliferation, and then go on. But also you can add, at the same time, you can use some of those alternatives that I mentioned, the prebiotics, the probiotics, and even the essential oils to some degree, as long as they're not interfering with the ammonia. So today, I think the biggest issue that we have is that we're going to use vaccines. We've got to use vaccines, and we've got to manage it right. And I think one of the best options is to have something in your grower phase where the most damage from the vaccine is occurring. It's not to say that the vaccines are going to cause any leading to vaccinate or necrotic enteritis, etc. But potential is there, and the potential is what we're trying to control.
Okay, very good. Well, we've been talking to Dr. Greg Mathis of Southern Poultry Research in Athens, Georgia. Greg, thanks for coming by. It's always a pleasure.
Well, thank you for having me.
You bet.